It all started when my brother-in-law, Greg, unexpectedly reached out to my wife, Mia. The way he phrased the invitation struck me as odd, especially because Greg had never been one to pull her aside for one-on-one talks. We were a close-knit family, so he often texted her, but it was always about family events, kids' schedules, or mundane things, nothing too personal. Still, something about his request felt off. "Do you think it's about Jessica?" Mia asked me, her brow furrowing as she mentioned Greg's sudden invitation to lunch. Jessica, his wife, had been going through some stuff lately, and I thought maybe he just wanted advice. After all, they had 2 kids, and I assumed there could be a personal matter brewing between them. I reassured Mia, telling her it was probably nothing, that maybe Greg just needed some perspective. She agreed, deciding to meet him at a local café near her office. The next day, as Mia was getting ready for work, she mentioned the lunch again. "I'm still not sure what this is about," she said, with a hint of concern in her voice. "It's probably nothing serious," I reassured her. "Just listen to what he has to say, and if it's something we need to help with, we'll figure it out together." Mia left the house, and a couple of hours later I got a call. It was her. Her voice was trembling as she told me everything that had just transpired between her and Greg. They had met at the cafe, and while the usual pleasantries were exchanged, talking about work, the kids, the mundane stuff, Greg seemed more nervous than she had ever seen him. She thought it was just the stress from work or something personal with Jessica, but what happened next completely took her by surprise. After their food arrived, Greg paused, took a deep breath, and then started talking about something else entirely. He complimented Mia, telling her how beautiful she looked, and at first she thought he was just being polite. But he continued, saying things that made her uncomfortable. "You've always been the light in my life," he told her. "You make me feel things I've never felt before. It was love at first sight. From the moment I first laid eyes on you, I've loved you." Mia froze, not knowing what to say. She couldn't believe her ears. This was Greg, my brother-in-law, who was married to my sister Jessica, the father of their 2 kids, and someone I had always considered part of my family. He was pouring his heart out to Mia, and she could only sit there, stunned, as he continued with his absurd declarations. Greg went on, making grand promises about how different life would be if they were together. He claimed he'd treat her like the queen she deserved to be, promising to give her everything. He told her he'd been holding these feelings in for years, watching her from afar, and that they were meant to be together. He talked about how his feelings had grown stronger over time. He even mentioned how he had watched her and admired her as she interacted with people, feeling more and more that they belonged together. Mia tried to speak to stop him, but he wouldn't let her. It was like he had rehearsed this speech for years and nothing would deter him. To give you some context, Greg had always been the fun uncle, the guy who came to every family barbecue, every holiday dinner, and sent messages to Mia about the kids' schedules. It was always friendly, nothing ever strange, nothing that would set off alarms. So, hearing this was like a slap in the face for Mia. She stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor as she left the cafe. By the time she was outside, she was shaking, trying to wrap her head around what had just happened. She called me immediately, her voice filled with confusion and fear. "Greg just told me he loves me. He says he's been in love with me since the moment he met me. He wants to be with me, not Jessica. I don't know what to do." I was in disbelief. This wasn't just a random guy, it was Greg, someone I had trusted, who was now confessing his feelings for my wife. The betrayal hit me like a wave, but I remained calm for Mia. "Don't worry," I said, trying to reassure her. "I need you to stay calm. I know this is a lot, but we'll figure this out. Don't let him guilt trip you into anything." As I tried to process what she had just told me, her phone started buzzing. Texts from Greg, one after another. First, an apology. He told her he didn't mean to make her uncomfortable, that he thought it was just infatuation, and that he was sorry. But the damage had already been done. The texts didn't stop. They turned into a mix of begging, saying it was a mistake, that he misread the signals, and that he thought she might feel the same way. Mia kept her composure while I listened in. Greg, clearly distressed, even started crying on the phone, begging her not to tell Jessica. "Please don't tell her. It's not like that," he pleaded. At this point I was livid. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. This wasn't just a miscommunication. Greg had crossed a line, and I didn't know if there was any way to fix this without it destroying everything. After Mia's call, I knew I had to do something. We couldn't just sit back and let this situation spiral out of control. I spent the rest of the evening thinking about the best way to handle this. The truth was, I had no idea how deep Greg's feelings for Mia had gone, or when they had started. Had it been building for years, or was it a sudden infatuation that happened during one of those family gatherings? I could tell Mia was shaken. She was trying to hold it together, but this was a betrayal on so many levels, and she felt guilty for being friendly with Greg in the first place. She knew she had always been approachable, playful even, with her family. But what Greg had done wasn't just a casual flirtation. It was a full-blown confession, complete with promises and misguided hopes. And now he was begging her to keep it a secret. "Mia, you can't blame yourself for his actions," I said, trying to comfort her as best as I could. "You were just being yourself. We both know how he misread the signals, and it's not your fault." She nodded, wiping away a tear. She was still processing everything, but I knew she wasn't the type to back down. She wasn't going to let this tear us apart. However, I could sense the weight of the situation was taking its toll on her. "I think I need to talk to him. I need to hear it from his mouth to understand why he would do this," Mia said quietly, her voice trembling. "He needs to know what this is doing to us." I agreed, but I also knew this was going to be uncomfortable. We had to deal with this head-on, no more tiptoeing around it. I told Mia I'd be there every step of the way, but I had my own reservations. The thought of confronting Greg made my blood boil. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. He had purposely gone after my wife, knowing full well she was married. And on top of that, he had the audacity to try and convince her that it was somehow her fault. The next day, Mia and I set a plan in motion. I called my parents to let them know what was going on. My father was furious when he heard, and my mother was in shock. It wasn't just about Greg's betrayal of our family, it was about the sheer audacity to target someone who had always been a part of the family. My parents didn't know how to handle it either. They knew Greg, trusted him, and yet now it felt like a veil had been ripped off, revealing a side of him none of us could have imagined. Mia and I decided to head over to my sister's house that evening. We needed to confront Greg and figure out what was really going on. My mind raced as I thought about the aftermath. How was my sister going to react? She was strong, but this was a betrayal that would shake anyone to their core. And what about the kids? I couldn't bear the thought of how this would affect them. When we arrived at my sister's house, the atmosphere was heavy. My sister Linda was standing on the porch with Greg, who looked like a shell of the man he once was. His eyes were bloodshot, his posture slumped. It was as though he already knew he had lost. But there was still that glimmer of hope in his eyes, as if he thought he could talk his way out of it. Mia and I walked up to them, and the tension in the air was suffocating. My wife, trembling, handed Linda her phone. No words were exchanged between them. The proof was already there in the form of texts and voicemails. Linda didn't need to hear any more excuses or apologies. She scrolled through the messages with a steady hand, her expression hardening with every word she read. Greg stood there, nervously shifting his weight from foot to foot, trying to explain himself. But the more he spoke, the more desperate he became. His voice wavered as he begged Linda not to get upset, to hear him out. But Linda wasn't having any of it. She remained calm, eerily so. "You need to pack your things and leave," she said, her voice low and controlled, cutting through Greg's pleading. "I can't look at you anymore. There's nothing you can say that will make this better." Greg opened his mouth to protest, but Linda stopped him. "No. This is your mess, Greg. You need to face the consequences of your actions." For a moment I thought he might break down completely. It was surreal to see a man like Greg, who had always seemed so strong, someone who ran into burning buildings for a living, brought to his knees by his own choices. But as much as I wanted to feel sympathy for him, I couldn't. His actions had hurt Mia, my sister, and the entire family. There was no excuse for what he had done. Linda didn't wait for him to argue further. She walked past him, over to Mia, and pulled her into a hug. It was a moment of solidarity between the two of them, a silent but powerful gesture of support. I stood there watching them, feeling helpless. The betrayal had hit Mia hard, and I could see that she was holding herself together only because of Linda's strength. Greg, on the other hand, looked like a man who had given up. He slowly trudged inside to pack his things, the weight of his actions finally settling on him. As Linda and Mia continued talking quietly, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anger and disbelief. Greg was family. We had trusted him. But now all of that was shattered. As the night dragged on, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Greg had packed his things and left, but it felt like an emotional war zone. The reality of what had just unfolded was starting to sink in. My wife Mia was still in shock. Her hands were trembling, her face pale, and I could see the emotional toll this was taking on her. She had always been a strong woman, but this betrayal had shaken her to her core. Linda, my sister, was doing her best to hold it together, but I could see the hurt behind her tough exterior. She was trying to remain strong for her kids, who had no idea what was happening. The whole family had been torn apart by Greg's actions, and the fallout was something none of us were prepared for. I stayed by Mia's side, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay. We couldn't undo what had happened, but we could control how we handled it moving forward. But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. Greg's obsession with Mia was something that couldn't be erased with a few reassuring words. It was deep, twisted, and something that had been festering for years. Later that night, Mia and I sat down to talk. The silence in the room was suffocating. We both knew there was no turning back from this, but we had to face the truth. I asked Mia again if she had ever felt anything more than friendship toward Greg. She shook her head vehemently. I never did, she said, her voice shaky but firm. I thought he was just a good guy. He was always there for our family, and I never once thought he would do something like this. I believed her. Mia had always been clear about her values. She took trust and fidelity seriously. But the emotional weight of the situation made her question everything, even the smallest moments that had been misinterpreted by Greg. I couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal too, not just from Greg, but from the way he had twisted their friendship into something much darker. The next morning, things didn't get easier. Linda and I spoke on the phone, and she sounded exhausted. She had spent the night going through the mess Greg had left behind, and now she was determined to take action. She was going to consult with a lawyer and get the legal process moving to ensure that Greg would not be around her kids anymore. Mia and I agreed that we would support Linda through this, but we both knew it wouldn't be easy. Linda was a mother first, and she would fight for her children's safety and stability. I could hear the resolve in her voice when she told me that she would protect her kids at all costs, even if it meant ending her marriage. But there was something else in the air, something more unsettling. The night before, after Greg had left, I had found a disturbing email from him. It was sent to Mia from a new email address he had created. The tone was full of desperation, as if he thought that confessing again would somehow change everything. He recounted his obsession with Mia, mentioning moments he had imagined were signs of mutual attraction. Reading that email made my blood boil. It was an attempt to rewrite history, to manipulate the situation further. But instead of weakening my resolve, it only made me more determined to protect my family. Greg was delusional, and I had to face that truth head-on. As the days passed, the weight of everything that had happened settled on all of us. The emotional pain wasn't going away, and neither were the lingering questions. But one thing was certain: Greg was no longer a part of our family. The damage he had caused was irreversible, and now all we could do was move forward, however painful that might be. The future felt uncertain, but one thing was clear: I would do whatever it took to keep Mia, Linda, and the kids safe from the fallout of Greg's actions. The following days were a blur of difficult conversations and emotional exhaustion. Linda had immediately contacted a lawyer, starting the legal process to protect herself and the kids. The weight of the situation was pressing down on her, but she remained resolute. I could hear the anger and heartbreak in her voice whenever we spoke, but there was also a sense of clarity that hadn't been there before. She was determined to shield her children from the wreckage that Greg had caused. Mia and I spent hours talking, rehashing the details of everything that had happened. Despite the clarity we tried to maintain, the emotional turmoil remained unyielding. Mia felt immense guilt. She had always been so careful around Greg, setting boundaries with every other man in her life, but with him she never thought it was necessary. He was family, and there was never any reason to believe he would cross a line. But now, in the wake of everything, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe some of her actions had been misinterpreted by Greg. She hadn't meant to give him any wrong signals, but it was hard not to wonder if things could have been different had she acted differently in certain moments. As much as I tried to reassure her, she was still wrestling with feelings of guilt that didn't belong to her. I couldn't blame her, though. She had done nothing wrong. It was Greg who had created this mess with his delusional obsession and his ability to manipulate every situation to fit his narrative. He had even tried to paint Mia as the instigator when he spoke to Linda, which made my blood boil all over again. To me, this was the last straw. There was no place for him in our lives anymore. Linda's lawyer told her that, with the evidence of his obsession, texts, voicemails, and the photos he had secretly taken, she had a solid case for full custody of the kids. The lawyer also advised that a restraining order could be pursued, especially considering the disturbing photos of Mia that Greg had been hoarding. The thought that he had been photographing Mia in secret for years was enough to make everyone in the family sick. This wasn't just an affair or infatuation. It was something far darker, an unhealthy fixation that had taken root over time. It didn't take long before Linda decided that Greg would not be allowed near her children, and that legal action was necessary to ensure their safety. The idea that he had been quietly obsessing over Mia, watching her without her knowledge, sent a chill down all of our spines. His actions had escalated to a point where it was clear that he was no longer capable of being trusted, not even with the most basic familial responsibilities. Meanwhile, Mia and I were still dealing with the aftermath of the email Greg had sent her. The email wasn't just a simple apology, it was a continued attempt to convince her that they shared some kind of special connection. He even tried to undermine me, criticizing everything from my appearance to my demeanor, trying to plant seeds of doubt in Mia's mind. The sheer audacity of it only solidified my resolve to protect my family. Greg was a danger, and it was time to make sure he never had the opportunity to hurt us again. We were all exhausted, emotionally drained, and scared about what the future would look like. But one thing was certain. Greg was gone from our lives and we would do whatever it took to keep him out of it for good. Linda was strong and she was fighting for her family with everything she had. And I would do the same for Mia. It wasn't just about protecting our marriage, it was about protecting the entire family from the chaos that Greg had brought into our lives. The weeks that followed were a series of emotional confrontations, meetings with lawyers, and, above all, a relentless pursuit of stability. Linda had moved into a temporary apartment with her kids while the legal proceedings moved forward. She needed space and I respected that. She was strong, but this situation was wearing her thin, and she needed time to process everything before facing Greg again. Mia and I spent countless hours reflecting on how everything had unfolded. It was impossible to comprehend how a seemingly innocent family dynamic could have devolved into something so toxic. Greg's obsession with Mia had twisted his perceptions, and now it had unraveled the very fabric of our family. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Mia was doing better, but I could still see the uncertainty in her eyes whenever the topic of Greg came up. The guilt she felt, though misplaced, was hard to shake. Every time I reassured her, it was like she had to learn to believe it again. Despite the tension, there were moments of clarity. We had to keep moving forward for ourselves and for Linda. The kids too were a priority. Linda had made the decision to shield them from the full extent of the situation, as best as she could. She was protecting them from the emotional fallout that Greg's actions had caused, but she knew they would eventually have to know the truth. Talking to a child psychologist had been a smart move, and she was doing everything she could to ensure they were supported through this tough time. But the legal battle was far from over. Greg had been served with a restraining order, and the custody battle was about to begin. There were so many questions still up in the air, but one thing was clear. Linda wasn't backing down. She had every intention of ensuring that her kids were safe and had a future free from the man who had betrayed her trust. As for Greg, he had returned home under the most awkward of circumstances. Linda had no choice but to allow him to stay there for the time being, as the legal proceedings hadn't yet granted her full control of the house. The atmosphere was unbearable, filled with unspoken words and a deep resentment that hung in the air like a dark cloud. There were no apologies, no heartfelt gestures to mend what had been broken, just an unsettling silence that spoke volumes. I knew Linda was struggling with the decision to keep him in the house, but the truth was she had no choice at that moment. The thought of him being there, lingering in the background of their lives, was haunting, but she had to keep going. It was only temporary, and once the legal proceedings were completed, she would be free of him. Mia and I knew this process would take time, but we were committed to making sure Linda and the kids had the space and support they needed to heal. Every step we took felt like a small victory, but we knew we couldn't let our guard down until the entire situation was resolved. For now, we had to focus on the present, on the steps that would allow us to rebuild trust and hopefully find some semblance of normalcy in the wake of the chaos. As the weeks stretched on, Linda's resolve only grew stronger. She was determined to rebuild her life, not just for herself but for her kids. The custody battle was still looming, but Linda was already thinking ahead, planning a future where she could protect her children from the wreckage that Greg's actions had caused. Every legal meeting, every conversation with the lawyer, brought her closer to what she needed: independence, strength, and stability. Mia and I continued to offer support, but there was a palpable distance between us and Linda now. Our families were broken, and though we had all tried to hold it together, we knew it wouldn't be the same. But for Linda, there was something liberating about the idea of standing on her own. She no longer had to hide the pain, nor did she need to accommodate the dysfunction that Greg's presence in her life had created. There was clarity now. She would fight for her children and their future, no matter the cost. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. The guilt that Linda felt was never fully erased, despite her knowing that she had nothing to feel guilty about. The emails, the pictures, the obsessive behavior, Greg's actions had completely shattered their lives, and yet she still wrestled with the idea of being a single mother facing the world without him. Linda had an incredible amount of strength, but we could all see the toll this had taken on her. Her eyes no longer held the same spark they once had. The woman who was always ready for anything seemed worn down by the chaos Greg had thrust into her life. Mia and I stayed close, though, offering as much emotional support as we could. We continued to remind her that she was doing the right thing, no matter how hard it felt. The kids, too, were going through their own process of healing. They didn't understand the full gravity of the situation yet, but they knew something was wrong. Linda had chosen to let them know in the gentlest way possible. With the help of a child psychologist, she explained things in a way that was appropriate for their age, reassuring them that this was not their fault. They were confused, of course, but they had both parents. One had just become an unrecognizable stranger, while the other became their anchor. One of the hardest moments came when Linda had to tell them that Greg would be moving out. It was painful to witness, as they still had a deep affection for their father, despite his actions. Their bond with him had been severely damaged, but they were still kids, and the concept of family was something they couldn't fully grasp yet. That realization made it harder for Linda to stick to her decision, but she knew it was the right one. It was a painful act of courage, one that would eventually show them the strength of character they would need to carry on. As for Greg, he had become a hollow shell of the man he once was. The once confident, charismatic individual had become a shadow of his former self, walking around the house like a ghost. He had no fight left in him, resigned to the idea that his actions had destroyed everything he held dear. Even though he continued to reside in the guest room, it was clear to all of us that he had lost. He had no place in the family any longer, and his delusions of grandeur had only exposed how deeply disconnected from reality he had become. His obsession with Mia, his manipulative lies, and his emotional instability had undone years of trust. And while Linda was trying to rebuild, she couldn't ignore the fact that Greg had played a key role in tearing their lives apart. He was no longer welcome in their home, despite the legal complexities that forced him to stay there temporarily. His presence was a constant reminder of everything that had gone wrong, but Linda was learning to be resilient. In time, things began to settle into a new normal. The custody hearing eventually took place, and the court granted Linda full custody of their children, citing Greg's unhealthy obsession with Mia and his unstable behavior as a threat to their emotional well-being. The judge ruled in Linda's favor, ensuring that Greg wouldn't be able to influence their lives further. The relief was palpable, and though the road ahead was still filled with challenges, Linda knew she had taken the first major step toward securing her children's future. She was free, at least in the legal sense. The emotional healing would take longer, but she was surrounded by the people who truly mattered: her friends, her children, and Mia and me. In the aftermath of everything, Linda seemed to find a new sense of purpose. She was no longer consumed by the pain of betrayal or the fear of an uncertain future. Instead, she focused on her children, on her own healing, and on regaining control of her life. The nightmare was over, but it had taught her the importance of standing strong in the face of adversity and trusting herself to move forward. It was the start of a new chapter for Linda and her children. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came next. After everything that had happened, I knew she would be okay. She had emerged from the fire stronger and more determined than ever. As for Mia and me, we continued to support Linda, knowing that we were all part of the family's healing process. It would take time, but we were ready to face the future together. We had survived the storm, and now we would help Linda rebuild her life, step by step, with love, support, and a renewed sense of purpose. The story highlights the profound impact of betrayal and the importance of resilience and self-care in the face of adversity. It shows how toxic behavior, whether from a partner or family member, can shatter trust and disrupt the lives of those affected. However, it also offers a powerful lesson in the strength of character that can emerge when we are forced to confront difficult truths. In times of crisis, it's essential to prioritize the well-being of loved ones and take the necessary steps, no matter how painful, to protect those we care about. For elderly audiences, this story underscores the importance of setting boundaries and trusting one's instincts, even when family ties are at stake. It reminds us that no matter how long we've known someone, we must never ignore signs of unhealthy behavior, and it's never too late to stand up for ourselves and our loved ones. The road to healing can be long, but with determination and support, we can rebuild our lives after trauma. Above all, it teaches that our worth is not defined by the actions of others and that we deserve to live in peace, free from manipulation or abuse. In the end, this story encourages personal growth, empowerment, and the value of choosing a future where peace and respect reign. Thank you for watching this video. If you found value in the story or the lessons shared, please drop a 1 in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on future content. Hit the like button if this video resonated with you, and be sure to share it with anyone who might need to hear this message. Your feedback and support mean the world to us. Let us know how this story made you feel and what you took away from it. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.